So here we are, week 4. We've made it, yay! Hopefully you're feeling really good and not too overwhelmed. I know we offered a lot of information to take in. Just for a little perspective, when I was in design school, we had pattern making class for 8 hours, 1 day a week for the whole year. And I know after those 8 hours each day, I was like, oh my goodness, we just took in so much, my brain was going to explode. So I'm hoping you're not feeling quite that way, but we know. But the great thing is, you have your notebook and you have the videos, so you can keep referring to that and just enjoy it and take it in, and no worries, right? So today, the great thing is, it's just kind of like me doing a show and tell. So there's no exercises, you don't need any materials. I think the only thing you may need is like a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, and just sit back and just see what my process is, how I take it from sketch to full garment. And this, like I said, we named this the Muslin method, right? But you can't find that probably on Google. That was just our name, so don't think this is an official technique. It's just something that I've done that's what works best for me, because it's a little bit of visual, a little bit of pattern making, so that works best. So how I begin my process is, the first thing I'm going to do is look for inspiration. I'm going to look in magazines, in Runway, Pinterest, art exhibits, out in nature. I know it's beautiful where we live right now with all the colors of the autumn trees. So whatever it is, I'm going to use that inspiration and I'm going to do some sketches. And once I have my sketch, that's where I'm going to start beginning to figure out, how am I going to take this from sketch to garment form. So after I have all my inspiration, I've done a front and back sketch. And I thought to myself, I saw this really darling trapeze kind of coat in one of the designer's runway shows, and I thought I want to try to adapt that for American Girl doll. So that's what led me to these sketches. Now the great thing is, to be organized and everything, we've done a style sheet, and I used to use these working at Nordstrom. That's how we used to do every line presentation. So it just helps to keep you organized. You can also put this in a notebook, and you can just have this for future. Because maybe you want to model after a style that you did in the past and you're like, where is that, or whatever. Here it gives you kind of like an outline of all your details. So we have your style name. I'm just calling this a swing coat. What doll it was designed for, that may or may not be important for you. The fabric, so that's important. Like, what am I doing this out of? Because I need to know the weight. How is it going to drape? How is it going to pleat? Is this even going to work in that type of fabric? And then I'll just jot down some of my notions. Like I need 3 3/8" buttons, and I need lining. So here's the important thing too, is when I'm thinking about pattern drafting, I'm like, what is my silhouette? What is the look I want to achieve? So that's important to always kind of remember, because we're analyzing our design. Like kind of what you did in Design Academy is thinking about proportion, thinking about your focal points. All of those things that you learn, you need to keep thinking, okay, with your design eye, what is the important part of my design? Then I'll list out any design details. So I have welt pockets, and then I have just pieced panels, can't see that under there, and then I have pleats. And up here I've taped on what my fabrics are, my qualities. So here's my wool, and this is my lining. After we've completed our sketch and we kind of have gone over what our focal points are and what our design details are, we're ready to start our first muslin. This muslin is going to act as our blank canvas, what we're going to draw our design lines on when we fit it on the doll. But before we get started, I think I better check out and figure out what the length is of my coat, because that at least gives me an idea of how far I need to make my first pattern. I think when I'm looking at this, I'm going to try around this area. So that's about 6.5. So I'm going to have my sloper measure down to about 6.5. To start with, we need to look again at our design that we're going for and say, do I have a pattern that I could model after? Is there something close that I've done before? Or do I need to use a sloper? In my case, I don't think I've done a trapeze jacket yet. So I'm going to use the American Girl sloper that we've developed. So the first thing I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and trace off my whole front bodice. Now, because this is a trapeze, that means I don't need a lot of fitting, right? So I can erase this dart. I don't need it. The rule of thumb is, if you have one dart, you can erase it. If you have 2 darts, like a bust dart and a waist dart, you have to do something with that second dart. So if I was making this for a really curvy doll, I would simply move my bust dart up to my shoulder and include it in the piece seams, which is almost like a princess seam. So you just need to remember, you can't really erase 2 darts because you're going to lose a lot of the shaping, but you can erase 1. So American Girl, she's a little tubular, it's easier to do. So I've sketched this, or I've traced that around. Now I know I wanted it to be 6.5 inches from center front. So I know I need to lengthen my sloper. So in that case, I'm going to take my skirt, and because it's not fitted, I'm just going to go up here and then just curve it down. So again, I'm not being precise. This is really just for our first muslin, our first blueprint, our canvas, and that's all we need to do. And this is what it looks like at the end. Now, I know that my opening is at center front, so I need to have a little bit of extension or a little bit of play so that I have something to pin. So then that's where I went ahead and added 3/8 of an inch, and that should give me enough also for my buttons. Now, because again, it's a swing coat, it would not do me any good to really have like a fitted muslin when that's not what the end product will be. So just for my sake, I'm going to give myself a little bit of ease and come out a little bit, just so I have a little bit of idea of how much more I'm going to add. So now I've cut out my pattern pieces from my sloper, and I've cut them out of muslin, and I've sewn them up. The important thing to remember is to mark center front on both pieces, and then also center back, because that's what's going to give us our kind of our grounding points. So as you can see, we have actually made our garment out of lightweight muslin, and you might think, hey, she's making it out of a wool coat. Why is she using lightweight muslin when they keep telling us that you need to make sure that your muslin fabric matches close to your real fabric? Well, on this case, this is just our blank piece of paper, right? So it's just our canvas, so it doesn't matter. We haven't added any of our fullness to see how it reacts, or our pleats. This is just our drawing pad, so then you can use whatever you want to use. Just make sure that you can see your marker or your pencil on it. So after I have cut out my sloper, or my pattern, sorry, let's start. After I've cut out my pattern and I've sewn up my first muslin, I'm going to take a general look and say, what is my first evaluation? And the first thing I notice is that her front neck drop is too high, and it needs to come down, especially for a coat when we're going to have it's out of wool, it has a collar. So we're going to drop that 1/8 of an inch. The next thing I notice is that her armhole, her arm's eye, is riding up too high. Again, I'm thinking she's wearing this over a sweater or a t-shirt, so for sure we're going to need to drop that down. So I'm going to drop that down like maybe 3/16, a healthy 1/8 of an inch. I think 1/4 would be too much. I look at the length and I say, what do I think? And I'm like, I think that looks pretty good. So that was probably a good estimate when I eyed that. Everything else looks okay. My sleeves are keeping pretty simple because there's so much design detail going on in the jacket. So now I'm ready to draw in my design lines. So I'm going to start with the back of my jacket, just because it has a lot of design lines going into it. And what I know is that at the side seams, my 2 points are going to come together. So I just want to play here first since it's more complicated, and then I'll go to the front. And hopefully where I've drawn these design lines will be cohesive with what I want in the front. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to look at my back yoke and think, where am I going to have this go down to? How's the angle? And I just really just kind of sketch as best I can. That looks pretty good. Now I'm going to think, okay, where do I want the waist of my doll? And I'm going to kind of do a little feeling, and I kind of feel like here's the top of her pants. So I'm just going to kind of go over here a little bit. Now I'm going to have inverted pleats here at center back, and then a pleat on each side. So this is a perfect example of showing you where I'm drawing this on here, and then I'll go ahead and draft it in pattern draft form in order to achieve this. I could drape it, but that is just a little bit more complicated, and this is a perfect way where we can have a visual of what we want and then go back to the paper and draft it there. So now I know I need my side panels. Where am I going to do that? I'm going to kind of guess here. This is just an approximation, and then I need to go down to my side seam. I think I want about right there is where I want it to end. Go ahead and go here. So as you can see, we're getting a good idea of it's starting to come to life of what it's going to look like. So now I'm just going to finish up drawing. I'm going to flip to the front, and then we'll start measuring onto our paper. So now that I have my full back drawn, I'm going to draw my front. And like I said, I'm dropping my front neck and I'm dropping my armhole. So I have this piece section in my jacket that I've drawn. And so I know too, I don't want that to go all the way to the shoulder because there's a back yoke. So I'm going to have a front yoke. So I'm going to go ahead and just draw an angle again, trying to duplicate some of these angles going on. And then I'm going to draw in my design lines for my front. Just a little notation of where my welt pocket needs to go. If I look to the side, I can go, okay, great. I think that angle and that design line is looking good. So now I'm ready to transfer these drawings that I've done here onto my paper pattern and create what will be our second muslin. The next step we're going to do is we're going to transfer our markings onto our paper pattern. So I'm going to start by doing this by just measuring, like, where is my yoke starting from center back. I come down and I say it's going to be about, I'm going to do it from the seam allowance, so that's going to be like 1 3/4. So I'll come over here and I'll measure down 1 3/4, make a little knot. Then I'm going to say, where is it coming from the arm's eye? Down from the arm's eye. It's about 3/4. So again, I'm going to come from my seam allowance. Here's 3/4. Now I'm going to draw up. There's my yoke. Then I'm going to figure out where's my waist. Okay, so I'm going to again measure center back, and I'm about at 3 7/8. So I'm going to go down 3 7/8. Then I need to figure out how wide do I really want my waist. I'll see what I drew here. 1 1/2. So I'll do it about 3/4 inch on each side. So there I have my waist. So now I figure out where's my upper panel. How wide is that going to be? I come down again, and that's about 3/4. So we'll do this. You can be more exact than me. I'm just trying to give you an idea of how I work. I'm going to keep continuing measuring and marking my design lines until I have them all drawn. After that, I'm going to add a notch on the top and the bottom of my side back, because as you can see, if I cut that apart, it's going to be a little bit confusing, like what part is going to what piece. I also added a grain line in, and now I'm ready to start manipulating my pattern. So now the first thing I'm going to do is actually cut my yoke off, and the easy thing about the yoke is there's nothing I have to do with it. I just need to add seam allowance to the bottom edge and then mark that I'm having my center back on the fold. So after I've slashed my yoke piece off, I'm going to add the seam allowances, so 1/4 inch, as you can see here, and then I'm going to fold it back because, as I know, is that all my yoke seam allowances are going to go towards the yoke. So I'm going to go ahead and cut here in order to give me my proper tail. As I look at my sketch, I see that I have an inverted pleat at center back and then 2 other pleats. The best way for me to do this is actually to slash and spread. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this piece out of my pattern. So next we're going to start by drafting in our center back pleats. So the center back one is inverted, and then I have 2 other pleats on each side going into that pleat. So I need to determine what is my pleat intake going to be. In this case, I'm going to make each side be 1/2 inch. So here I've drawn on a center back line, and now I know I need to pivot that out to 1/2 inch, and I'll go ahead and tape that. To make my side pleat, I just need to figure out how far from my inverted center back pleat do I want it to be. Looking at this, I think I'm going to have it be like 3/8 inch. So I'm going to go ahead and mark off 3/8. Now, as we learned in our Pattern Academy exercises, where you're slashing is where your fullness is going to. So I want it to be a little bit more angled and not going totally up and down straight following the inverted pleat. So I'm going to just kind of eyeball a line that's kind of midway through my yoke line here. And this is a line I'm going to start slashing and spreading in order to achieve my other pleat. So I'm going to go ahead and again spread my slash 1/2 inch to match what I want my pleat to be. So I'll go ahead and tape that down. And now I'm simply going to add seam allowances, and I'm going to have a nice gentle curve here. And in this case, I'm going to also draw in what the direction is of my pleats. So now here's my finished piece. You can see that I have my pleat intakes, my arrows, and my seam allowances. So the next piece we're going to work with is our lower center back piece. Now if you look here, I want a little bit of fullness, a little bit of movement. And the best way to do that is again to just slash and spread, fill in, and draw our natural curve. So I just made design lines in my piece of where I wanted to slash and spread. I want to just evenly distribute the fullness around. I kind of left the side section a little bit flat because I don't want a lot of fullness there. Now this is the tricky part, is sometimes you can just guess how much you want to have. When it gets into the real fabric, that's where you're like, ooh shoot, it didn't work, or maybe it did. Maybe you need to decrease or increase your amount of fullness. This is where I love removable tape, because you can kind of manipulate your same pattern without having to keep adding layer upon layer of taped pattern pieces. So as you can see, here's the finished lower back piece, and here's also my side back piece. All these pieces now complete my back. So here we have our finished side front and center front coat pieces. As you can see, I just slashed, added seam allowances, and then I marked where my welt pocket was. I also added a 1/4 inch seam allowance to the front extension so that my front opening is ready to go and be set for buttonholes and buttons. So after you've manipulated all your pattern pieces, then you can go ahead and cut it into something that's similar to your fashion fabric. I had to use a heavyweight muslin. I'm hoping this does the trick. I didn't have a lightweight wool extra that I could use. So this is the best effort that I could think of. Hopefully the pleats and the flouncing will behave the same as the wool. Won't be exact, but it'll be close enough. So when I look at her, I think to myself, she looks a little bit boxy, like I wish she had a little bit more waist shaping. So I know I'm just gonna take a little pinch right here on each side. The other thing I noticed when I was sewing her is after I drafted just my total convertible collar, just as you did in the pattern exercises, is that for some reason it was like 1/8 of an inch off. So I'm not sure where the glitch was there, but I am going to add 1/8 of an inch to my total length of my pattern. Now let's take a look at the back. The back, I feel like she's a little slim through here for a trapeze coat. So I'm gonna slash and spread my pattern pieces to give me just a little bit of ease. And again, that's just a personal preference, but that's kind of how I feel. Again, I like the length. I think the collar and the yoke and all that will be fine. Just my overall impression, I think that dropping that, the 3/16 was just probably the perfect amount because I still feel like her armhole is looking good. So now we are ready to make those alterations onto our paper pattern, and then we're ready to go into fashion fabric. So here we have our pieces all made up in our fashion fabric. So here's our coat. When I look, I think the little bit of waist shaping, the little nip and tuck there really added to it. We have our welt pockets, and I think she's looking pretty good. I think it achieved the silhouette that I was hoping for. Now, if you look at my sketch, you'll notice that I had a really big collar. But what I found was that that collar was just too overwhelming for this doll. So that's why I scaled it back to just this size. So if we look in the back, you can see we have our pleats and they're looking nice, our yoke. And here we have our little flounce. So I think she turned out pretty cute. Here's the side view, and you can see that the panels are matching. So let me know what you think. I think she turned out pretty good. So our jacket is going to be fully lined, so we're also going to have to do lining pieces and facing pieces for it. So I went ahead and slashed and spread the same distance that I had for my front pieces, and then went ahead and marked my facing and down my center front to give me my pieces. Cut it apart, added seam allowance. Now another trick that you could use is that if you have a master pattern that has a lot of pieces that are going to be cut, you can go ahead and make a photocopy of that before you slash and spread everything, and that way you have your basic shape that you can then draw on your lining pieces and your facing pieces, and it's a lot easier.